Hello and welcome back to another episode of Ambitious. Today, we are diving in with a guest that I am seriously so excited for you to tune into and listen to, because this guest is somebody that really embodies the duality between the masculine and feminine. In today's episode, we're going to be diving into everything from the tragedy that sometimes happens that causes us to create change. We're diving into the definition of ambition and how to rewrite what that looks like for you, and also how to see the signs that maybe you have a relationship with ambition that needs to be adjusted or needs to be altered. Today's guest has a 10-year background in marketing with some of the biggest global brands. Since then, went on her own to start her own business consulting company, only to have a situation that did happen that caused her to really reflect on what she was building and how she was building it. Since then, she has been able to really dive into the mindset work that is connected to ambition. She is on a mission to make sure that the women that she serves do not have to compromise peace in order to be able to pursue the things that they want to achieve. She wants to make sure that there's inner balance with the business that they're looking to create. So without further ado, let's get into today's episode with Anna, the CEO of the AW Creative. All right, Anna, well, welcome to Ambitious. So excited to have you here. And this
I'm so glad.
I just knew, I was like, I have to have her on to talk about this because frankly, guys, we have had private Zoom conversations about this. And I was like, this needs to be a podcast. Too many people are experiencing exactly what you're talking about to not have this recorded as a resource for someone. So thank you so much for coming on.
Oh, I'm so excited to be here. I feel like every single time we have a Zoom call, it could be like 5,000 podcasts. So to have one officially recorded was much needed.
Exactly. And I'm like, we're going to tempt you guys to fit this all into 1 hour. But frankly, if I'm being honest with you, you probably do need to listen to her podcast or get into her world because you need this for hours on end, as she said. But kind of a little bit of a 101 of today, we're going to be talking a little bit about balance in business because we have talked in our own private Zoom chats about the fact that this is kind of like a buzzword that is thrown out a lot. And I think, with that, there's a lot of confusion as to what that looks like or what that means. And so part of this conversation actually in our Zoom chats, as we said, was kind of stemming from the fact of actually your origin story, right? And it kind of inspired a lot of the work that you're doing today. So I'd love to just hear from you as to, kind of the story that created this as the source of inspiration to kind of start this work.
Yeah, so the prologue to even this is I come from corporate. I come from 10 years of corporate marketing experience in New York City. That's all I've ever known. I've worked for really big brands. So then when I started my business, I kind of took all that strategy, corporate knowledge, and I just translated it into my business, which is why I was able to be so successful. And I always had the kind of mentality of I'm so ambitious. I'll do anything to hit my goals. I can bulldoze through any problem imaginable because that's who I am. That's my identity. Until the beginning of last year, where I went through grief. And it was the first time I ever experienced grief. And it took something like that, unfortunately, to kind of make me stop in my tracks, because for the first time in my life, something physically happened to me where I couldn't bulldoze and I couldn't just put my emotions to the side and I couldn't just pretend that everything was okay. And I think we all know what I'm talking about, of living in that land of everything's fine. What are you talking about? This is not gonna affect anything. No, not me. I can bulldoze. It was almost like my identity of being ambitious was shattered. Yeah, so this box that I lived in, that I had myself on this pedestal of I'm ambitious, I'm all of these things that I label myself as. For the first time, I started questioning it because I couldn't act as I acted before. And that was the first time I felt like the rose-colored glasses came off. And I was like, wait a second. Am I actually happy? Do I actually like what I'm doing? Why am I doing what I'm doing? And I know you filmed an episode about understanding your deeper why. And that was my moment of why any of this? And at that point, it became this huge shedding and healing journey of really peeling back the layers and really unraveling what it meant to be ambitious. And what I actually came to terms with is that my ambition was actually holding me hostage. Because my ambition was keeping me in this box of you're only ambitious if you do X, Y, and Z. So I was almost pretending to like all these things just to keep an image, when in reality, I wanted multiple identities. I wanted to be ambitious and I wanted to heal. I wanted to be ambitious and I wanted to pull back. And I like just wasn't allowing myself to be more than one thing because of this like perception that I was like trying to keep in a box. But it unfortunately took a really tragic event for me to kind of pause and realign with my values, truly understand my values, evolve past what I was doing, and come to the fact that I needed to find inner balance, because just going at either 0 or 100% just wasn't working anymore, nor did I want it to work. I didn't want to bulldoze anymore. So that was kind of like where my journey began. And now that's what I help other powerhouse entrepreneurs do as well.
You see what I'm saying, you guys? There's just so much to unpack there. There's just so much to unpack there. Okay. I have to rewind to the beginning because obviously you mentioned the grief portion. And I know one of the things that you have talked about, even in connection to your story, but also I feel like I've heard this with other people's stories as well, is that it is extremely unfortunate, but it seems to be fairly common that a lot of people need some kind of tragedy, crisis, illness, like something to happen for this shift to occur. So like, is that something you feel like is almost like a pattern now, in the sense of that people really need that life altering event in the sense of like a situation happening? Or do you feel that this is something that we can avoid in the sense of not needing those? Or just, you know, when people talk about rock bottom, like, you have to hit rock bottom before you see a change. When you are looking to achieve balance in business and you're looking to reset the system, do you think rock bottom is needed to do that?
I would like to live in a world where it's not needed. And so like I'm on a mission to make sure like rock bottoms aren't a thing. But unfortunately, I think it's just the way we've been conditioned to bulldoze and put things to the side and say, no, I'm not going to lead with emotion. I'm not going to like let this affect my business. That's a phrase I hear a lot. I'm not going to let this affect my business. But the thing is, if it affects you, it affects your business. Like you are a human. And I think that's also something ambitious entrepreneurs kind of don't want to face, is like, you are human. As much as you want to think you're the super person, which you are, but at the end of the day, you are a human. You do have emotions. You are experiencing life, and that is just so natural that it is going to bleed into your business. And I think for the longest time, I didn't want to acknowledge that. Like, me, human, never. Right. So for me, and what I see with my clients, is it takes a point where you physically, emotionally, mentally, and spiritually have hit a wall where what got you here no longer will get you to the next phase, because you physically can't. Like, it's almost like this paralysis occurs. And for me, that paralysis was grief. I have other clients that it's health issues, cancer, infertility issues, other tragedies, divorce, or even it's like good things like getting married or having a baby. But these like really big life events, whether they're happy or sad, that just completely shift your value system because of life and what has occurred, whether that be good or bad. And then all of a sudden you realize, like, wait a second, I've outgrown my values. I've outgrown this phase of life. And I don't know how to adapt my business to it, because I've just naturally evolved as a person. What I wish I would have done is I wish I would have seen the warning signs, or I wish I just honestly would have been honest with myself. I think I just really wish I would have been honest with myself even like 2 years ago, or even when I was still in corporate, of like, do I really want this, or do I just like the perception of it? Do I like the way it makes me feel? Do I like how these like fancy jobs look on my resume, right? Like, do I like this money because the way it makes me feel, or do I feel like it's just my net worth is attached to my self-worth? And I just, unfortunately, those are really uncomfortable questions to dig into. And when you are really ambitious and you just are chasing the next goal, it's really easy to just kind of like fill a void and not think about those deeper questions. But when you know how to be that introspective and you are able to raise your consciousness to be that self-aware, I think that's when you start avoiding rock bottoms. And I can safely say I like don't think I'll ever hit another rock bottom, because I now for the first time in my life have tools that will make sure that doesn't happen again. But I don't think most people have those tools.
Well, you mentioned something that I definitely want to circle back to, which was like, I wish I saw the signs. I wish I saw the signs. I wish I saw the triggers. And for you and for many of the people that you work with, what would you say that those are, in the sense of the person who maybe has a skewed or a unhealthy relationship with ambition?
Yeah, so I always say now I fully see that there's like a healthy side to ambition and unhealthy side. I think if your ambition, like I said, is holding you hostage for the person you desire to be, if you are constantly making decisions out of what does this say about me? Like, how does this make me feel? Like, what is the perception of me going to say about this? For example, if you have an income dip and that completely changes your personality, that
Yeah.
is not healthy. That
Yeah.
directly tells me that your self-worth is tied to your net worth. That is not healthy. Your perception of like, oh my God, my client told me I did a good job, I automatically feel good about myself. You should feel good about yourself if a client tells you you did a good job or not. Like, I'm sorry, what? That's just one part of it. But then it's also the like, are you genuinely happy on a day to day basis?
Mm.
I wasn't, but I thought I should be grateful and I thought I should be happy. So I pretended I was happy. So I think in general, if you're doing a lot of pretending, if you feel like you're limiting to yourself to a box, if you're like, oh, success will feel good when, like, no, success should feel good now.
Yeah.
So I would be like, if you're just being radically honest with yourself and be like, are you having a good time or are you only having a good time when you have dopamine hits? That is a very big indicator. Like there's an unhealthy balance going on there.
Well, yeah, I think there can't be this constant connection between happiness and achievement, because think about how such a
No.
place that is when 90% of the time we're in process, we're in the pursuit of whatever it is we're looking to achieve. So if you think about, like, even outside the business space, if you think about, saving for a house for most people is going to take, shape over a couple years. So if it's like only when you actually buy the property that you feel good, that entire process is going to be so painful. And so I think what I've seen, at least with a lot of women, is this connection to when I achieve, therefore I am. So, like, even outside of business, I think it can be like when I achieve a certain size, when I achieve a certain look, when I achieve a certain whatever it is in business, at that point is when I feel, you brought up a really good word, which was like validated. Like when your clients say you're doing a great job, you're validated. And I think often we don't really have any aspects of understanding our validation if we don't get that outside kind of like confirmation, right? Like I think that's what I'm hearing.
Mm-hmm.
Like so many people are using outside confirmation to say you're okay, you're good, you're valid, versus you saying like it kind of has to come from internal. And I think that aspect of income is such a big one, because I think
Yeah.
in business, because there's, already natural competition between women, but then in addition to that, you're seeing a lot of plastering of I make this much and I've achieved this milestone. And I think it can be difficult for women to kind of figure out, who am I without that label? And so I'm thinking back to earlier you, and, like actually when I first met Anna, you've always had duality, but I feel you were more on the side of the masculine than the
Oh,
feminine. So I am curious, because I definitely always resonate with the masculine, to think for someone who feels that maybe right now they're so wrapped up in the identity of their achievements. Like even for myself, I don't really feel like there was a certain point where I didn't even know who I was without my business. I didn't really
oh yeah.
identify with hobbies. I didn't identify with any other traits. I was like, I'm a marketer and I'm a brand and I make this much and I'm this earner. And so
Yep.
if I started to remove those labels, I realized, wait a second, who am I outside those things? So I'm thinking back to past you, and you mentioned that kind of like identity crisis of really what I would anticipate is you living very, very much in the masculine, and then starting to say, wait a second, like you mentioned earlier, maybe this feminine is what I actually need in my life.
Yeah, I remember specifically, like, I had a meeting with my therapist, and she was like, well, if you remove all these things, who are you or what do you want? And I was like, I literally have no idea.
Yeah.
This is literally all I've ever known. So the fact that now the thing that I put on a pedestal, the thing that I had in this box that I treasured, that I worked so hard for that to be the thing that no longer makes me feel good, literally felt like I was like not only grieving this person that I loved that I lost in real life, but I
Yeah.
was also grieving myself.
Yeah.
And that's when I completely like fell apart and I was so lost because I was like, well, if I don't even know who I am anymore, where am I even going? It felt like I was just like floating in space and I had no idea whenever I was going to have my feet on the ground again.
Right.
And that was so uncomfortable. And to this day, like the hardest thing ever. But
Yeah.
I'm so glad I was forced to completely be in the space of limbo, because then I had to make a decision. Then for the first time in my life, it was like, actually, I'm not looking for anybody's validation because I don't even know what validation I am looking for. Like, I don't know. So like in that period of time, I had to develop radical self-trust and lean on myself to validate what felt good. What did I actually want to do? And that was the biggest piece of me finding peace and me finding inner balance, is that like I've developed like that radical trust that everybody talks about, but nobody ever like actually goes into detail about it.
Right.
But you have to get into that space of like, I call it going back to factory mode. Because when you're born, like you don't have these preconceived notions and yes, yeah, like I like literally had to go back to like factory mode and be like, who am I? What do I like? Do I like that because it was forced on me, or do I actually like that? And now I feel like that cured so many things. It cured comparison, it cured imposter syndrome, because now I have such like a clear identity, clear set of values, and I'm just really satisfied and good with myself that I find fulfillment in the smallest things now. And because of that, like when the black and white dopamine hits happen, I'm like, oh, that's great. But also on a day to day, I'm just having a good time now, which that was not me 2 years ago, let me tell you. So it's just complete. So it's not only changed my business, but it's changed just like every facet of my life. And it's just such a wild way of living instead of bulldozing and climbing a mountain every single day.
Well, when you're talking about like the self-trust aspect, I think especially in entrepreneurship, it can feel so hard to do that because you feel like you're constantly seeing so much stimuli of like, this is the way, and that is the way, and this is achievement, and that is not achievement. And so I'm curious, when you're at that place and someone feels like right now, like I feel like all my validation comes from the online world. I feel like all my validation comes from my business. And if I didn't have that, I don't know who I am. Like that is me. How did you start to go from that outside validation to that inward validation, or as you said, self-trust?
So, first thing is you have to create space in your head. You can't like outthink whatever you're going through right now. Number one, I really had to get quiet and actually create space in my mind to actually think and not think about strategy, but actually create space for just like my intuition to come in. Because now I see that I was like trying to use logic and a marketing strategy to solve emotional issues. You can't do that. No marketing strategy can solve emotional issues.
Do you mean in the sense that you feel like you were looking to see achievement and instead of processing the achievement, you were looking to create it through the business?
Yeah, like you're overstimulated with strategies and you subconsciously feel like you're not good enough. No matter what you do is, never good enough. It's never the result you want. You're needing, not wanting, but you're needing that more to feel good about yourself and to amplify your self-worth. So then you're like, oh, well, I just need another funnel. I just need a passive course, right? So you're trying to like overcompensate for internal issues by just adding on more strategy, or, oh, I just need to work with that person, or if only I had passive income, or if only I had that. And no amount of that will ever actually heal and fix what is like internally, subconsciously inside of you that needs to be deconditioned and shed. And that's like where the feminine comes in, when people are like, it's not that you need to let go of strategy, but you just need different solutions. And those solutions can't be logical. They need to be like truly introspective. That's what that means. You will see such different types of growth in your business when you actually look inward and fix the inside, because that just naturally reflects outside. So I created space in my head. So for me, and also I'm not somebody that can meditate. I don't journal. I don't do any of those things.
I feel like you're either from one camp or the other. You're like, I can meditate or I can't.
Yeah. No, if I'm having a lot of anxiety, I do like breath work, but I'm like not going to be a sit down type of girly. I can't do that.
Not some Buddha in the corner, you guys. Okay?
No. So for me, I love going on walks, but I go on silent walks. And then when I go on silent walks, I like literally just talk to myself out loud. And I find that when I do that, it actually allows for inspiration and like downloads and my intuition to actually pour into me. Because when was the last time you actually had an original thought? Like, when was the last time you had an original thought that wasn't something you saw, but something that truly just like sparked inside of you?
Well, frankly, we have no space unless we create it.
Exactly.
You're getting inundated. You're in the car, maybe listening to a podcast. You're on a walk, listening to a podcast. you're on your phone on TikTok, you're on your phone on Instagram, you're in your email getting notifications, you're getting text messages from friends. You are constantly being inundated with stimuli. And so I think, as you said, getting that space, I think for myself, even truthfully, when I first thought about building a business and being ambitious and going for it, I never associated clarity of what to do with a walk originally. I was like, yeah, sure. I'm going to get the big idea.
I had the exact same reaction. Somebody told me to go on a walk and I was like, I have better things to do.
Right. I was like,
and now I'm like, LOL, that's literally, a walk would literally solve all of your problems. Like, no joke.
It's just such a misconception, because I think this idea of strategy, balance, and even the feminine, like all of it really gets a bad rap. And I think that that's so deeply misunderstood.
Yeah.
And I think what you noted earlier of like going for walks, that's where the clarity came from. I think if you really reflect, do you have downloads in the shower? Do you have a download when you're going on a walk? Download. Most often you are going to be getting your downloads when you're not working. There's a
1,000%.
You're creating space to actually be able to listen. And I think my learning was like, the voice is always there of what it is that you need to do. Like the idea is there. The solution itself is there. The problem is you've got the volume turned up on every single other stimuli in your world. And because of that, you can't hear what is supposed to be happening coming through as a solution for you, because you've got way too much noise around you.
1,000%. You need to close the tabs. The tabs. And the easiest way to do that is to literally disconnect, like truly. And even when I tell my clients, find some way to create space for you. Like for me, it's a walk. For you, it could be whatever. I really don't care, as long as it works for you. But it just needs to be something where you feel like you can truly be present, which is like something I also struggle with. I now realize I've never actually been present, which is why nothing was ever good enough. I had a client to me say the other day, she was like, I see so much abundance around me. Like I physically, logically see it, and yet all I feel is dread. And then that sends her into like a shame spiral and a guilt spiral and like, oh, I should be grateful spiral. So it's like, how can we logically see all this abundance around us, but like actually feel it as well? And I feel like that's something I didn't have. It was so disconnected for me for so long. And that's why I think a lot of us who are really ambitious just like chase the next achievement and the next dopamine hit, because we think that when we finally reach a certain number or a certain point or a certain launch goal, then like that feeling that we desire to have, that connection to self that we desire, is finally going to click. But an achievement is never going to make that click for you. You first have to find that within yourself through space and through other tools and tactics. Yeah. So then when you get to the achievement, it's not all this glory, because it's not all this glory. It's just not.
Well, you mentioned earlier too that your values change in the sense the old you had certain values, the new you has certain values, but yet both are technically ambitious women. They're just very different versions of ambition.
Yes.
I'm curious, when you think about old, potentially, let's say, flawed mindset around ambition to the more now balanced mindset around ambition, what are the values that you feel you maybe identified or saw that you were like, this is not serving me, and even though I think this is ambition, it actually needs to be blank?
Yeah. Well, I used to be like a huge feminine work hater because I come from corporate. So I was like, oh, a strategy can solve any problem. But that's also the reason why I felt so exhausted. It's why I burnt out. It's why I hit a wall. It's why all of these just negative things happened inside of me. And so now I fully see the duality of like, do you actually have the tools to know when to leverage the strategy versus the inner work? And I now know when I'm up against a challenge, a situation, is it actually going to be solved with a strategy? And is that where I need to put my time? Or is this actually just something going inside of me? So instead of wasting my time on strategy that's not going to solve the issue, I need to actually focus on me, like use the tools I have and work inward. So it's completely become like a time saver. One. And therefore I've seen better results because I'm not wasting time and I'm not doing things that just are going to make me like feel the same way and see the same results. I'm also now very clear that I've outgrown my values. I think before my only value was I just need to be as successful as possible I don't honestly know what I thought, but it's just like the way I was programmed.
Yeah.
Just,
Yeah.
just the next, the next, the next, the next. So I don't actually know if I truly had values outside of that, if I'm
It
being
was like a
honest.
morphing into the values, less of a conscious decision almost to like change them.
Yes, it was really like autopilot. I think when you're so ambitious, it almost becomes autopilot to achieve. And then when something does happen, you're like, wait a second, I don't feel good
Right.
anymore.
Right.
And now I'm very conscious to what makes me feel good and why does it make me feel good and why do I want to do it? Because I now have a clear understanding of my values. I'm so much more intentional. And because of that, I actually
Yeah.
enjoy the process and I see better results. And so while everybody around me is like in a like tizzy fit, I'm like, I'm good. I'm fulfilled. I'm happy, but I'm also ambitious. And I think people have this misconception that like if you're satisfied or if you find peace, that means you're not going to achieve more. But I argue that satisfaction is how you're going to achieve more. Because if
Mm,
you're satisfied, that means you're good. That means you're like so happy. And then therefore you have more motivation and more drive to achieve more. Versus when you're just like forcing your way up a mountain,
yeah.
you're going to be exhausted every step of the way. And that's the force, that's the pressure. Like I used to think that was power, but now I realize like that is not power. Really listening to yourself, being intentional, it's almost like silent power, I like to call it. And not only is that like way more effective, it's actually so much more empowering. And it's actually how you're going to achieve actual sustainability and not just like buzzword sustainability.
Well, I think it's also finding like you also in a way they're hitting on the fact that growth doesn't have to be hard. Like in the idea
No.
of like ambition and achievement, I think there's a lot of this belief that it's a grind, it's a hustle, it has to be hard. And so I think when you're talking about the aspect of balance, I feel like, especially in the work that you do, I very much connect the word balance for you into the connection of belief system. Because I think it's less about the process of how you're doing it and more a matter of like, what are the beliefs that are the underlying root of the work that you're doing? Like at the end of the day, Anna now and Anna then were both making funnels. It's just the belief that you're bringing toward those funnels, the mindset that you're bringing toward it, the energy that you're bringing toward it is different. And therefore, the experience of that building also changes along with it.
Yeah, 1,000%. I think that's just something I was so against for some reason. And like you said, it does have a bad rap because I think the internet really makes it seem like they're polar opposites. Like you're either all woo woo, feminine, all of that, or you're super strategic, ambitious, masculine. And realistically, you're not going to find sustainable success in either ends of the
No,
spectrum.
no,
You're going to find it at that inner baseline. You're going to find it
right,
when you understand duality and like I mentioned when you actually acquire the tools to know when to leverage which one. That's actually where you're going to find happiness, fulfillment, sustainability, and that's when you're actually going to learn how to operate from a place of flow versus force.
right.
And flow to me is a lot more powerful because it just goes. It
Yeah,
goes and it doesn't stop and it's easy, but it still is moving. And it's just, that's when everything pours in versus force is like control. It's the anxiety, it's the pressure, it's you feeling like you work well under pressure. No, you don't. That's just something you have convinced yourself of.
yeah. Why do we need pressure to be part of the equation at all? Would be my question.
But I think most people think that pressure is motivation. You want motivation, but pressure is not motivation.
Mm,
Motivation comes from flow. Motivation comes from satisfaction, from fulfillment. So I feel like now I have a lot more motivation and not pressure. So I don't feel this constant dread of like, oh my God, it's not enough. Oh my God, I feel like everybody's working harder than me. Oh my God, why is it so much easier for everybody else?
yeah.
Because like for the first time, I'm actually staying in my own lane. I'm good in my own lane.
Mm,
And I just don't feel like the outside noises don't affect me as much. And once again, that's where you're going to see that sustainable and enjoyable success.
right, right. And I mean, when someone connects success to hard work, how do they even go about reframing that? How do they even go about rewriting it? Because a lot of this seems to be like, it's such a transformation to go from like current
Mm-hmm.
and like you noted, kind of I'm not into the feminine, I'm not going to go on a walk to get my next big idea. Yeah, right. Like if you're in the mindset of I can't slow down, I gotta hustle, and like very much like the mindset that we're talking about of like the past us selves, which obviously for both of us, you guys know my story and have now obviously heard Anna's story. we know how that goes in the sense of where that takes us. And so I think when you're looking at, but I just feel like when I watch online, I have to work hard. Like you said, I have to outwork other people as someone's mindset. Where does someone even begin to rewrite the way that they think right now? Like if you were like, without the tragedy, hopefully.
Without the tragedy.
That's the hope, without the tragedy.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I feel like everybody that comes to me is at that crossroads. So, for example, I'm currently working with someone who's a luxury interior designer in New York. And she also comes from the corporate world, had a really big, massive job in corporate in the city. And it's not that she went through anything tragic necessarily. She just hit a point where she was like, I can't imagine feeling like this one more day. My analysis paralysis, I feel like I can't trust myself anymore. I just don't know who I've become. And she was like, I got to the point where like I didn't need another big solution thrown at me. I just needed somebody who understood what I was going through and like met me where I am, because I just couldn't do it anymore. And so the first thing that we actually did with her, because she was like, I just don't know what's going on. Literally nothing's working. And so the first thing we did with her is like what I like to call like a thought sorting exercise. So essentially the way you're going to change your core beliefs and you're going to stop self-sabotaging and you're actually going to change your habits and a la you're going to change like your life is by actually like catching your thoughts and rewriting them in the moment. And that's a muscle you actually have to like train. Just like you go to the gym, you almost have to go to like your muscle mind gym. So for example, when we're going through a thought spiral, which we all do, if I ask you what is the thought that you're thinking right now, you'd probably be like, I don't know, I just feel like super anxious, right? Because we don't actually catch our thoughts. But if we do catch our thoughts in the moment, and in that moment, we actually label them as like, is this an actual intuitive thought? Or is this just like ego, shame, and scarcity trying to come at me? Then in that moment, you have a choice of how you want to act from and rewrite that thought. So I kid you not, she did this exercise for the first 7 days we worked together. Within 7 days, she was like making changes. She's like, yep, I'm doing X, Y, and Z. I feel great. I dumped my boyfriend. I'm doing this. I was like, okay. I was like, okay.
I did not tell you to do that, but that's fine.
I was like, I didn't tell you to do that, but okay, I'm glad. Yeah, I'm glad. And then she was like, literally, my clients have noticed a change in me. Like my parents have noticed a change in me. And she's like, all of a sudden, I'm so clear on like what I want to do. And now I'm ready to move forward and really get the clarity I need overall. But it's just like, that's such a simple exercise to do that I do with all of my clients. And it just shows you that little tweaks can truly make the world a difference. But the difference is like, you actually have to ask for it. Like you actually have to say, hey, I don't want to feel like this anymore. I don't want to think like this anymore. And I'm willing to invest in something like this, or I'm just willing to put in the time and effort that you might not be super comfortable with because it looks so different and it feels uncomfortable. But at the same time, you just don't want to feel like this in the next 10 years or even like in the next 24 hours, if I'm being honest.
Right.
So it truly starts with just using your mind as a muscle that you're going to train to actually catch your thoughts. And then from there, that's where you can truly start understanding your deeper whys of what's going on. And from there, it just becomes this like bigger spiral effect. And the more you do that, the more you're going to see changes and the more you can actually rewrite these conditioned stories of like, it has to be a zero sums game. If I don't work hard, then I'm a failure. If it's not perfect, then I'm not ambitious. If I don't hit 7 figures in the next 12 months, what is everybody going to say about me? At the end of the day, I'm really happy when I have like neutrality. If there's no story going on in my head, oh, I'm happy as a clam.
Yeah.
I am happy as a clam. And if you're listening to this, if you didn't have these stories in your head, chances are you'd be like, I'm good. Right?
Well, like taking back control too. I was very like, mindset work, whatever. I was not into it originally. And then someone had an analogy and they were basically talking about you have 100 horses and these 100 horses, they're all tied to a post in the ground. They all have a string connected to them and they're tied to a post in the ground. And so 5 of those horses are going to run to the right and then 95 of those horses are going to run to the left. And they were basically talking about the fact of like, who's going to pull the stake out of the ground? Who do you think is going to be dragging who? And so the 95 horses or the 95% of your brain, which is your subconscious, which is the thoughts that you're having. And so for me, that analogy, for some reason, that delivery really helped me to internalize, okay, maybe this is something I need to be tapping into, because the work that you're talking about in doing that mindset work, there's the conscious side and the subconscious side. And I think just realizing that the conscious thoughts that you're having all stem from somewhere, whether, like you're saying, they were learned from childhood, learned from the online space, learned from wherever, whether they were taught to us or we caught them along the way, they are something that we integrated. And so we don't necessarily know that something else could be controlling this story. So like, I think a lot of the time when we're just so wrapped up in the world of business, we don't take time or space, as you noted earlier, to really actually be able to listen to what the stories are, acknowledge them, and from there also unpack where those are rooted in the sense of like, where did these come from? And actually, most importantly, is this even my thought in the first place? Is this how I feel? Or is this something that was passed on to me from whomever? And I think you mentioned the aspect of awareness. Like, it starts with awareness because I know that you have that 4-step framework. So you've got the awareness, acknowledgement, transformation, and integration. Yeah. And so the first step, obviously, developing awareness of what are the thoughts, what is the kind of like root cause of what you're doing right now, and starting the process of unlearning. But so say someone's like, okay, I'm at this place. I'm maybe the classic masculine person who says that they don't have time for mindset work, or like, I'll get to it later. Maybe they come from a belief where they don't feel like the walk is what's helping and they're trying to strategize, but it's just not working. They now are like, okay, I am definitely aware because I feel like I definitely do have some of these thoughts. Maybe they also have seen people online and felt I'm not enough because I'm not making that. Maybe they also feel like I'm not hitting my milestones fast enough. What the hell is going on? Now that we have an awareness that we feel that way, the next step going into acknowledgement, what does that really represent to you?
Yeah, it's acknowledgement of like, okay, I'm very aware I'm having these thoughts. What am I making these thoughts mean? Or like, why am I having these thoughts? So, for example, a lot of ambitious women, the moment they have an income dip or you don't hit that 7 figures in like 12 months, all of a sudden your demeanor changes. I literally had a client say to me one time, my husband can literally tell when I haven't hit a quota because it shows all over my face and I'm depressed. And okay, so if we're acknowledging that that is happening, why do you think that is? And do you actually want to continue acting like that? Do you actively want to continue that story and that narrative? Or do you actually want to heal that relationship? Because ultimately, in that situation, that's a classic example of your self worth is clearly tied to money. So then it becomes like, okay, well, we are aware of that behavior.
Yeah.
We acknowledge that that is not healthy. So now it's like, do you want to go down the route of actually detaching your self-worth from money and be in this place of like, I want to achieve and I want to have unlimited growth. I want to make all the money in the world because I can and why not? But at the same time, I'm fully wanting to get a place where I know my happiness and my relationships around me are not dictated by a digital number online. So it's like the awareness of the thought, but then the acknowledgement of the reality and what it's actually caused you and what's actually happening. And I think that's the hardest part to kind of admit. And that's kind of where my self-identity crisis happened because I was like, oh my God, I feel like I'm literally grieving myself. And so it's that acknowledgement that this is not a healthy behavior and I just don't want to live like this anymore. But I think that can be really painful for a lot of people because it was really painful for me. But at the end of the day, on the other side of that is you actually living a very authentic life and running on a very authentic business on your terms. And it's probably not going to look like what you imagine, but that's great because it's actually going to be what your soul actually desires.
Yeah.
And it's not going to even be affected by comparison because you're just going to be so solid in what you actually want.
So it's really the aspect of awareness of what's happening, the thoughts you have, what that looks like. Then almost with the acknowledgement, kind of what I take from that as well is like the aspect of like impact of that awareness. So like, you have those thoughts. How is that impacting your relationship? If you have those thoughts, how is that impacting your business? How is it impacting your team? How is it impacting the way that you market even? Like, how is it impacting you on all fronts? And to come to terms with that, I definitely agree is very difficult because it's almost like once you see it, you can't
unsee it.
So you start to see the old ways you operated only to realize, oh my God, like I don't even know what this looks like. As you said, like what does this new version of my business success look like? And so the third aspect I know you talk about is the aspect of like the transformation of the releasing of that, the triggers, the habits, the patterns. So like when someone goes into the transformation part of it and they have this awareness, they've acknowledged the impact, and they're ready to take the change portion, where do you even begin? Because I would imagine, in the sense of for someone listening and like, okay, like I'm ready to see a shift in the way that I'm pursuing my goals. Like you said, it's messy. It's not something that's necessarily going to be like a perfect linear pattern. So if you're thinking about going into releasing some of those triggers and habits, what would you suggest to someone who feels like they want to start making movement on that?
Yeah, I think once you've created the space and you are starting to get downloads, you are starting to get clarity, and you are very open to acknowledging the impact of what you've been doing so far, I think that's when you're finally in a space to really start creating those evolved set of values and being like, okay, this is what I no longer want my operation as just like a human being to look like. And this is the direction I'm maybe wanting to take it. And once again, it's messy. So, like, if you say these are your values, but then 3 months down the line, you're like, actually, I want to refine and optimize, like, that's totally fine.
Yeah.
That's okay. Right.
Yeah.
But it is truly like a journey of like, you don't really know where you're going, but you definitely know better than where you were before. Right. So you're kind of like surrendering to this fact that you know that you're on your way to your most authentic version. You just may not know what that looks like yet,
Yeah.
but you're really trusting that you will find her, that
Right.
you will eventually find that. And it's that radical self trust. Like, if I just take one step forward, then the next step is going to appear until eventually, like, I have all of the pieces of the puzzle. But in terms of like, that actual transformation part, it's like the surrendering of the how and then moving from your evolved values, but being very conscious to it. So now, for the first time, probably in your life, you're going to be so hyper aware of what you're doing and how you're doing it, where before you were probably on autopilot mode and you were just doing whatever probably triggered you to move and act.
Yeah.
and and that caused you to operate from a place of like, I don't even know why I'm feeling this way, but like, it's all I know.
Yeah, I think when I went from what I kind of consider to be like flawed belief system to a new way of
Yeah.
thinking, I think you hit the nail on the head, which is that oftentimes this new version of you, even though you would so desperately love a blueprint as to how they operate and what they would do, like all of us would die to be like, you were this.
Oh,
And
oh my God. I would be like a billionaire if I like
yes,
figured that out by now.
yeah, but I feel like you like the undertone of values is such an important piece because I think for myself, when I was kind of going from this belief system or process that frankly was kind of the root of a lot of the burnout that I had experienced in that phase, shifting to a new phase for me, the values became my guiding force. And so to your example, for me, it was like when I got faced with a decision, I kind of like saw it as like two forks in the road of like, okay, what would
Yeah.
old me do? And then if I'm thinking about these things that I'm telling myself I care about, because again, they're not perfectly ingrained yet, they're very fresh and new. Now that I have awareness of those and I know that this is the impact that I want to have or the reality I want to have, I have two forks in the road. How can I make sure I choose the right path? And I think for many business owners, they would love to, with anything, achieving a goal and becoming a certain person. They want this blueprint of exactly what to do to become that. And I think the unfortunate, but the reality part is that's just not an option. Like the way you become that person is a byproduct of having the fork in the road, these two paths, and having the value system that makes you choose the path that actually makes sense. And so I think what you said is so spot on, which is a lot of us are in such autopilot mode that we're not even consciously making decisions. Like we're not
No.
consciously asking ourselves even why we're marketing the way we are. I think a lot of people are not conscious of is like, why do you even want to make that money? I'm shocked, absolutely flabbergasted by the amount of people who say, I want a six-figure business, I want a multiple six, a multiple seven, whatever it may be. And then I just follow up with one word, like, why? And they cannot tell me. And
They
it's like,
cannot.
it's not yours. That's because that goal was not actually yours. It's because someone else said, this is what success is. And so I think when you unpack it and you cause people to go introspective to say, well, what is the root of this? They go, holy shit, I don't know. And that's because
Yeah.
like the origin of it, it's not actually your goal in the first place.
No, no. And I heard somebody say this on a podcast recently who was also super ambitious and went through the same type of journey. And it took her actually 4 years for her to find all her puzzle pieces. But she said that there's dignity in the process of finding clarity and you can't rush it. Because ultimately, like the person you're going to become and the person who is, back to her like factory settings, that process is what's going to make you go back to that factory settings. If you rush that experience, you're rushing through all of the lessons, and there's dignity in that. My process took me like a year and a half. For
Mm.
hers, it took her 4 years. But at the same time, I am who I am today because I didn't rush the process. As painful as it was, and as much as I wanted to hurry up, now I fully see that it was all for a reason, because I truly needed to learn how to sit in pain or in really uncomfortable situations and know how to sit, process, and then work through them, instead of being like, oh my God, this is so uncomfortable. Just get it off of me. Just get it off of me. Let me escape the situation. All of that I see now is not only going to last me for the rest of my life, but that is what's going to truly build sustainability. Because I think a lot of the times people just, things don't work out for them is because they don't actually know how to sit in that in between. They don't know how to sit in that really uncomfortable part and
Yeah.
still be like, no, I trust myself to keep going. And I don't mean just keep going in business, keep going with like a project or a launch or anything like that. And it's because they don't actually have the capacity or the tools to know how to sit in that in between period where that really uncomfortable, like, dignity of the process is happening.
I think sitting in discomfort in general is something that is a massive trait of people who don't achieve what they ultimately have the potential to achieve.
Oh, a
Because,
thousand percent.
in my opinion, it's not actually, I think a lot of people associate their ability to achieve with work, as we talked about, in work ethic. But I also want to add the caveat that work is still necessary in achieving.
Oh,
I
it's going to be hard. You're still going to have challenges. Things are going to suck. Like, no.
Yeah, I
Like,
want to clarify
yeah.
that flow also doesn't mean we're like farting rainbows, okay? We still are going through and putting in a lot of work, but I
Yes.
think the experience of that work and the ability for people to go through, I think you mentioned such a great buzzword that I would want everyone to sit with, which is tools. Do you have tools to be able to sit in discomfort? And I almost hate to say it, but like feel at home in that. You're like, yep,
Oh, yeah.
we're feeling it. I'm fine. Everything's fine, because it allows you to navigate these moments in business because you know you have tools that you can rely on. I think it's when, in my opinion, even looking back on my journey, I think a lot of the time I reacted to things just quickly. Like I got, like, as you said, I got to get this off me. I got to stop feeling this way.
Mm-hmm.
And that was
Mm-hmm.
because, frankly, not necessarily that I even wanted to make that choice, but I just didn't want to feel the way that I felt anymore. I didn't want
Yeah.
to say, I was at a 20K month or something, and I feel like I did something and it didn't work, and now I'm uncomfortable. And so I'm sitting there and I'm like, okay, well, I am just going to do this and I'm going to do that. And I would instantly go into reacting to do something instead of sitting with the fact of like, okay, well, why do we care that it was a difference of $5,000 anyway? Right? Like, really actually asking yourself, do we need to react to this? Is that the move we need to be making? And I think that discomfort aspect is such a big piece. I think it was often with coaching as well. I was saying something the other day, like I try to train clients to self-soothe, almost like the Ferber method for babies. Like, if
A
you are
1,000%. Yeah.
crying and screaming, I need you to be able to self-soothe, because if you, every time you have a problem, are rushing to implement something without taking that time to really reflect on what's happening in the first place, you are making such reactive decisions. And I think there's this kind of tug of war, because we see a lot of messaging, right? Of, success loves speed and go, go, go. And then people see that, but then they're also like, but I'm supposed to be reflecting. I'm supposed to be introspective. So I think
Mm-hmm.
that duality you mentioned is such a gray area, I think, for so many people. And so I'm
Yeah.
curious as to, if someone feels like they have really big goals, but they also want to make sure that the pursuit of those goals is not something that hinders them or potentially causes patterns that don't serve them, how do they discover the duality? How do they kind of make sure that they are in that place of the middle?
Yeah. Well, I think a lot of people, going back to your point about the decision making, I think a lot of people make band aid decisions versus legacy decisions. And I
Mm,
don't think they're even conscious to that. You're such in an autopilot reactive state of mind that I now fully see that what I thought was really good decisions was just me making band aid decision that in the short term gave me great results, but long term is where the burnout, the self identity crisis, the lack of fulfillment, the like lack of spark in my life and my business came from. So I think it's almost like you're not even conscious and you don't even have a firm understanding of the long-term consequences of your decision, because you just don't have the tools and the capacity and the space to really understand it on a much bigger level. And I feel like now I fully have that. But in order to find that duality, it's everything we've been talking about up until this point. But I would argue you can also make really fast decisions and have them be legacy decision and have them be intuitive. But have you been working on that muscle that I was talking about? Have you been training that muscle? Like for me, in case anybody doesn't know this, like I live in the south of France and I literally made this decision in 3 hours and it was like the best decision ever. But at the same time, this
I
like
literally remember when she came on Zoom and she was like, "Oh, did I mention that I'm moving?" Guys, she was in New York City and she made the decision super quick to move. And I was like, "Oh my
yes.
God, okay." So yes,
Yes.
absolutely. Sorry, continue.
So it's like my apartment flooded, and then I got this letter saying I have to be evicted because there was mold in my walls, and it was like a whole thing. But by that point, I had been developing that muscle for like close to a year. So I went on my walk when I got that letter, and I let myself spiral. And that's another thing. It's like when we're creating space, I want you to feel your emotions, because that's something I wasn't allowing myself to do either, because I thought emotions were a sign of weakness. They weren't powerful. They were like, you shouldn't like make decisions from your emotions. All of that is so not true. I now see that. So like I used my tools, I went on my walk, I did my thought sorting exercise, and because I've utilized that muscle within my brain, it literally hit me like a ton of bricks, where my intuition was like, this is your time to go. Why don't you go to France? A lot of people oftentimes ask me like, how do you even know what your intuition like feels like or sounds like? And to me, I always say like, your intuition, one, is never going to make you feel like a piece of shit. And we all know what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
And number two, it's going to feel like such a calming choice, even if it's a huge choice. And I remember like I was walking in Central Park because I lived right next to it at the time. And when France came into my mind, I literally like stopped in my tracks and I was like, oh my God, why don't I do that? That seems like a great idea. And I've been talking about it forever. And I remember like going back to my apartment and I called my friend who lives here next door to me now in France. And I was like, what do you think about this idea? She was like, oh my God, so crazy that you say that because the apartment next door just opened up. And I was like, look at that. Look at that. But I think old me would have been like, that's not logical and that's not practical. But I have those tools and I've used that muscle where I can now make really fast decisions that are legacy decisions. But it starts from like actively knowing how to work through that framework. And my goal for whoever I work with is they use that framework and the methods I teach them, where they can self soothe and use those tools by themselves, where they don't need me as a crutch
Right.
forever.
Right. Well, you mentioned the word thought spiral, and I think you'll often hear people joke about it, like I'm spiraling kind of thing.
Yeah.
Something that they're really deeply feeling. And I remember I was talking to somebody actually earlier today, and we were talking about emotions and the fact that emotion is really only truly active for like 90 seconds at a time. And so if an emotion is only actually truly active for 90 seconds, but yet we feel it for so much longer, why is that? And it's going into the fact of like the story and the unpacking of it. And so I guess when we're thinking about thought spirals, my kind of definition of it is the emotion sparks the thought, and the thought of where that thought goes and what it creates, that's up to you in the sense of how far you let it go, how deep you let it go, how much you kind of, catastrophize it and let it kind of create its own thing. But I also think, to your point, there's also a lot of beauty in that. There's a lot of positive things that come from those sparks. So I'm curious, in your opinion, when you're thinking about, thought spirals, are thought spirals to you something that you consider to be kind of like a negative connotation, or do you almost think it's like a spark that starts the curiosity and the creativity to go?
Yeah, I think a tool that I didn't have before is I would just let the thought spirals like run rapid. And it's almost like once you're on that ride that you never even asked to be on in the first place, it's just kind of like you're at the mercy of it and you don't have control. And you're like, all right, well, there goes the rest of my day because now I'm just like spiraling out of control, and I'll get off the roller coaster whenever my mind decides it wants to get off the roller coaster, right? So when you become that like thought sorting machine, you become aware to it. you get to acknowledge the thoughts, you get to acknowledge the emotions, and then you get to actually control the situation moving forward. So if you're someone who you're like, oh, I love being in control, chances are you're not. You just have a lot of anxiety. You're not actually in control. Let's
Yeah.
be honest,
Yeah.
right? But when you have this muscle and you know how to catch these thoughts, then all of a sudden you can start asking, like, wait, what is this emotion trying to tell me? Why am I feeling this emotion? Okay, I clearly need to process whatever is going on now and then decide how I want to take action moving forward from that. So, yeah, it's a great indicator. I almost see it as like a traffic stop or traffic light. When those emotions are so like rampant in your body, that is literally like a sign from your body and your intuition that something is going on and we need to check the gaslight.
Yeah.
Something is going on about like under the hood.
Yeah.
But when you're ambitious and you bulldoze and you don't have these tools and you are 100% strategy, you're basically like ignoring the check engine light. And you're just like, I don't see that. I don't need to check that. And that's when just eventually the car breaks down.
Yeah.
Every single time the
I
car will break
would
down.
argue to say, I feel like, at least for myself, I can speak for myself. I feel like I saw the light and I was that classic girl who was like, I've got a couple more miles in me. Right? Like,
Exactly. You're like, I'm on E. I
yeah,
can keep going.
I'll make it there. I'll make it there. I feel like I knew and I feel like I saw it. But truthfully, I think kind of back to the tragedy or the crisis piece, I think I didn't take it seriously because I didn't really understand what it would look like to hit that wall. I had no
Exactly.
concept of what that would look like. And I thought, to your point, you've mentioned a couple times, which I really appreciate, which was that even though you were in this process that now was not serving you, something that I think is going to be difficult for many people to digest is like, but it got really good results. And that's the
Yeah.
really difficult for this work for most people. And I will tell people this, like I've talked about this on other episodes, like I hit 7 figures in 18 months of starting my business. And while that's really beautiful as a tagline, it was fucking awful. And I would never suggest somebody else do that. And so I think the difficult part for most people is this desire to achieve balanced with, well, like, but I could just have pain, then achieve it, and then find balance. Like this aspect of seasonality of pain.
Yeah.
So at least for myself, the way that I kind of explain it to people is the way in which you create it now is the way in which you will create it in the future. So if you build a business on a flawed belief system, a flawed plan, a flawed strategy that really is rooted in a ton of scarcity and honestly a lot of underlying mindset issues, which is where it's all rooting from as the yes or the no to this, when you're building from that belief system, from that center, yes, you can get results. You can build a massive business.
Oh, yeah.
Your time, like not to be negative, but like your time is coming. And so it's a matter of when that wall will hit. It may be in your first year. It may be 5 years in. It may be 20 years in when you've built like a massive empire and now you have to burn it to the ground. But I guess for you, when you started to see, all the success that you had and all of the things that you've achieved, but you also now know that it's all centered around this really flawed belief system and operating system, as you said, like settings that you don't want to have anymore. When clients are like, but I want to still achieve those things, how do you feel like you work that middle ground?
The way I see moving out of this as a movement in general is actually normalizing talking about this. Something that I now see that I didn't fully understand is I think I was so against doing the mindset work, the inner healing, the feminine side to the masculine is because I actually didn't see anybody like me talking about it. The
Yeah.
only people that were talking about mindset and feminine versus masculine were like super feminine woo woo. And I just didn't see myself in them. So I wasn't going to work with them or hire them or even be in their circles because why would you be somewhere where you don't feel like you belong?
Right.
Right. And so, and then on the flip side, it was people like me were only talking about masculine and nobody actually was talking about like hitting rock bottoms or like the actual, finding clarity and the working of the muscle and like the more like practical side to the healing, which is why I think I'm so different. And so when I hit this point, I remember feeling like really like ashamed and embarrassed because once again, the box that I had built myself for my ambition told me that if I'm ambitious, then I should be able to bulldoze. And people like like me don't have these problems. So it just built a lot of like shame and resentment and guilt. And I didn't know what to do because that wasn't me. So who's this person that I just don't recognize anymore? And now I see that a lot of us have these. It's just we don't feel safe vocalizing them because one of the messaging online, two,
Yeah.
the lack of messaging. But also, I think that even when we're like in coaching or in masterminds, like everybody wants the groups to be high vibes and everybody wants to celebrate. So you then coming into a group and being like, I'm actually going through something really hard, like you feel like there's no place for that.
Yeah.
And it's just weird. You're on this like weird lonely island when you shouldn't have to be. And then two is like, I feel like I'm hoping that by talking about this and spreading more awareness about it, more ambitious women say, hey, I can feel that tragedy coming and I really don't want to hit that point. And I already am starting to recognize that like I just don't feel good right now. And I maybe don't have quite necessarily full clarity on where I do want to go, but that's actually the work I'm willing to do to make sure I don't actually hit that point. And that's the sweet spot when you come to actually someone like me to be like, hey, I want to avoid this. Success just doesn't feel good right now. I feel like I've lost my spark. I don't want to stop, but at the same time, I do feel very limited. How do I just shed everything that's holding my ambition back from being truly like unlimitless? And I wish I had that clarity and awareness to like stop myself at that point and be like, hey, I need to take this seriously.
Well, I think as you said, I think even for myself, when I went through it, I felt like the exact same way. I saw people who were charging their crystals in the moonlight, which like no shade to you if you do that. But like that was all I saw when it came to feminine.
Exactly. Like it didn't feel safe.
It was like sitting in a Buddha position and meditation and crystals and saging the house. And I was like, I don't know that I'm there yet. Like I understand I want to tap into feminine, but I don't know if I'm there yet. And I think because of the lack of exposure to the message, it makes many ambitious women scared to say, well, that's the piece I'm missing. Because frankly, it's safe to say that you're missing strategy. Because you're like, oh, it's just like a quick thing. I hire it, I get a blueprint and boom. But it actually takes real work to figure out that you're the missing element of the success that you want, that you're stopping yourself. Like that ownership of that, if you actually own that, could be the difference maker of where your business goes. The easy way out is to say, oh, it's a strategy. I'm not going to go look at myself because I'm not the problem. And so I talked to a client today and she had came to me with a pretty intense situation. She's going through a separation. And I said, listen, like you mentioned at the beginning, and I think it's a really important point that I want to circle back to, which is that with all of this work, there is no divide between the personal and the business. Like, yes, we can try to ensure that, our personal doesn't completely drive the bus when it comes to the business, because technically some businesses are like their own baby kind of thing. But I think that we also have to realize that like if you are a personal brand and you are running your business, there is a lot of integration of those two sides together. And so she had said to me, thanks so much, kind of like our conversation basically today is what we were talking about with her. And she said, thanks so much for sharing this. Because I'm going to be honest, when I shared this with a previous business coach that I had been going through this, the response was very different. And I was like, don't mind me asking, like, what was the response? If you want to be an entrepreneur, this is what you signed up for. And so you need to be putting in the work. And if you don't put in the work, then you're not cut out to be an entrepreneur. You don't want it bad enough. And when I say that I was boiling inside with anger, because I think especially as women, we have so much duality to where we're at. We want to be the masculine that's needed for the business, and that's understandable. But we also have this feminine side that's such a power in business that like as women coming into business, we're kind of trying to act like men. Like
1,000%.
No, like you might be like, no, I'm not. But like in a way, we are kind of fighting for our space in a male dominated realm. And so then when you have forces that say tap into your feminine and they equate the feminine to crystals, now again, no shade to crystals, I'm just saying as an easy example, when it's on only this one parallel kind of pathway and that's the only version of what's allowed to be, no wonder women are rejecting it because they're like, that's not what we're going to equate all of this down to. And I think I'm sure of you guys listening obviously to Anna today, like the reason I was so excited to have her on was the fact that one of the parts of like, as soon as she brought this on a Zoom, I was like, oh my God, this is like so juicy. This is such good stuff because this is actually helping women who are ambitious, who have that masculine and are not upset about it, to start to integrate the other side that helps them to achieve that balance, rather than feeling, like you said earlier, like you have to pick a camp to be part of.
Yeah. I mean, at the end of the day, what I didn't realize is like doing the inner work, all that means is all we're doing is shedding the things that are holding you back. Why wouldn't you want that?
Right.
Right? If you feel like shit right now, why would you want to continue feeling like shit?
Right.
That's literally all it is. It's not about slowing you down. It's not about you sacrificing peace for profits or anything like that. It's actually getting down to the root of what do you actually want? With no judgments, with no ego, what do you actually want? And let's decondition and just shed everything that is holding you back from actually having the business and the life that you desire, with just like that's on your terms.
Mm-hmm.
That's it. That's it. But I don't think anybody talks about it that way.
I've never heard it explained that way.
Yeah, exactly. But in reality, that's what it actually is. And that's what I actually do. But like, if you want to do crystals, that's great. But in reality, this is what the work actually looks like.
Right. Okay, this definitely is me, in the sense of all of these things are resonating with them and symptoms that they're feeling right now, and maybe have had some of those beliefs of like, I am how much I make, and I am how many followers I have, or I am the success of my clients, and those mindsets resonate with them. With all things considered today, if someone's like, I just need to do something about this, where do they start?
I mean, you start by actually taking it seriously and want to commit to doing this work. Once again, this is not something that can be fixed in a week, in a month. Like I said, for me, I had to really dedicate a solid 6 months to this. And then from there, it just became, an ever flowing clarity, self growth journey. But it truly, like the tools, the muscle of my mind that I was talking about, really like constructing my new value system and then evolving my business model. I mean, that truly took a good 6 months to a year. And like I
Mm-hmm.
said, my other friend, like it took her 4 years. And I'm not saying that it's going to take everyone that
Yeah.
long, but I'm
Yeah.
just saying it's not a plug and play formula. Yes, there is a framework. Obviously, we like went over that today, but we're not dealing with a strategy. We're dealing with you as a human. And that's going to take time.
Mm-hmm.
So, if you're serious, then you actually need to invest the time and the resources and actually acknowledge that this is something that you just don't want to do anymore. You don't want to live like this anymore. Success should feel good. And if it doesn't, that's a clear indicator that something is off. You can't diet your way to happiness. You can't diet your way to success. Like you said, you can't build a certain way and be like, all right, it's going to be great when I hit 7 figures. It doesn't work like that. I also don't want to feel like shit when I achieve my like 7 figures or 8 figures or like whatever I want to do. I genuinely want to enjoy every single day. I actually can do that. I actually can enjoy my days.
Yeah.
And at the same time, that doesn't mean I'm like not ambitious or achieving or like my momentum slows down. So the first place you start is by actually dedicating the time and the resources to this. And you are preparing yourself that just like with business coaching, it's going to be a process.
Right. Right. Okay, I'm gonna throw a curveball at you. Is how, with both of these things considered, so you've had this phase of like the
Yes.
masculine, you've had the phase of the duality you now. With knowing both sides, if you were to define ambitious and what that actually means to you now with all the experiences that you've had, what does that mean to you now if you were to think about being ambitious?
Kind of like what I said in the beginning, like me being ambitious means truly I have no ego, no judgment, no perception around just what I want to do. I truly don't live in a box anymore. And I didn't even realize I was like living in a box before. When you're truly ambitious, like you don't think about achieving based off of like, oh, I only want to achieve 7 figures because that's when I'll finally feel successful. You're ambitious because you just truly know that anything you want, you can have.
Yeah.
And whether that's evolving or burning things down to the ground or feminine or masculine, like you're just game for everything. And
Mhm.
you don't let anything stop you from deciding one over the other. So truly being ambitious is just being limitless, but it's being limitless without the perception of what that means.
Yeah, I think for me, like when I think, after today's conversation about like how I would kind of like distill it down almost when you think about being ambitious. And I think with all the experiences myself, and even with your story of what you shared, I think it really is like the pursuit or the process of the potential of what is possible for you.
Yeah.
So I think it's like pursuit and process very intentionally, because I think it's not about the achievement. Like I think people assume being ambitious is achievement. It's not about the achieving of it. It's about the pursuit of it. And so I think the pursuit and the process, and again, of the potential of what you can be, not the entirety of what you can be. Because I think that we also, at certain points in pursuit of things we want, are going to have to compromise on things. And so even though you have the ability to be X, you're tapping into a level of your potential, less of a identity of what you have to be in order to be like checkbox success. So I think like today, I was honestly so excited to dive into this topic, because I think ambition and being ambitious, and also just being a business owner and trying to figure out this balance of the duality between the two sides, is something people constantly struggle with, because there's just no conversations, as you said earlier, about this as to like tactically what does that look like, and also maybe like signs that someone is even in that situation, right? So if someone wants to connect with you on socials, needs to sink into more of these topics and just hear more of this from you, where do they go?
Yeah, so I'm on Instagram, I'm on TikTok, the AW Creative. Love talking. So if you resonate with anything in this episode, please DM me, send me a voice note. I'm so happy to chat with you because, like I said, more of this just needs to be out there. And I'm more than happy to go first and be like the trailblazer in this field.
To lead from the front. Exactly. To lead
Yes.
from the front. Beautiful. Well, thank you so much, Anna. Today was awesome. And guys, we will see you next week. And as always, stay ambitious.